And if you want to share your screen and talk about the CVRS portion, and if you wanted to, I know you said you'd be willing to talk about sort of the whole thing, but it was my understanding for the most part people were having the most trouble with the CVRS portion. So maybe we could start with that and then also take questions.
All right. Well, hello everybody. Let me try and do the share screen here. Is this do you see a redistricting presentation on the screen at this point? Someone can just give me a nod or a shake. Yeah, all right, we got it. So one thing, so Fred talked about this a little bit. I did a larger redistricting class a few times for people, and I got probably about 40 towns total participated in it, just close to the full number of towns that actually need to do redistricting around the state. But I'm going to do maybe about a third of it here, and just to show you, to focus more on the converse stuff. Before you begin doing your redistricting, you do need to have a list of what streets you believe belong in what districts. You can develop that on your own. I can sort of help you with it, and I've gotten like the census data to kind of like do that automatically. There is not, I tried to see if I could message or chat with people in the Zoom class. I was not able to, well, I would suggest, send me a note or a message or something if you need a report like this. You can't really do it in Zoom. So I'll put my telephone number and office email on there at the end of this presentation. So if you need a copy of a report like this, so you have somewhere to start, let me know and I can do that for you. Now, I just want to emphasize a couple of things. After you put in your redistricting on the state system, somewhere in the fall, we're going to probably get a report from the Secretary of State's office where they tell us what errors they think we've made before running the November election. This is an example of what we got in 2012 from them, and I know it's their intention to do something similar again this year. So I don't want to say, oh, don't worry about making mistakes because they'll catch it. But there will be sort of a proofreading process that happens after you do this, where they say, here's what we expected. And sometimes they give you some stuff that's not correct, but checking against it does give you the opportunity to find some errors. So I'm going to go past this. I want to say, Fairfield County has a lot of towns that have to redistrict separately for state years and local years. We have some towns that don't have to redistrict at all because you're a single polling place town, and some towns that have the same polling places used for state years and local years. So you have to figure out sort of what you need to do to actually get new districts. But in the near term, before your council or anything else acts, you're going to need to implement the redistricting that came from the state. So you look at whatever ordinance or resolution from your Board of Selectmen is on the books establishing your voting districts, and realize that any place that a new state rep line or state senate line cuts through one of those existing voting districts, a new voting district is created in that place. So like an example of this is like New Canaan. They have their 3 voting districts, but they've also been crossed like multiple times by state senate and state rep lines. So they now have a minimum of 6 districts and likely even more than that. If one of your voting districts is entirely within a state rep and state senate line that none of those boundaries cross through your districts, you don't need to do anything on Converse to change that district. All the voters in that district can stay in that district, but you need to figure out for ones that are split, who's on which side of which line, and you have to do that by address so you can put it into the computer. Now, hold on a second here. This timeline stuff, I think, has been well covered by Ted. The one thing I know that was in their email that was not really emphasized in his class is that they want to have this stuff done into the Converse prior to the late March selection of delegates for state conventions, because the towns won't, or the state parties won't know how many delegates to give each town until we put the redistricting numbers in. So they want to have that done sort of before that delegate process happens. March 20th is the first day it can happen, I think, and March 29th, I think, is the last day that can happen. All right, so when you put this stuff in, a normal person, I think, is going to make some errors. I would suggest making a backup of what you did, whether that's by printing out a street guide before you begin, printing out each page on the state system so you can have a backup reference of where each street was in terms of like its old district, and you can write the new district on there as well. And if you would like to, and especially if you have elect council people by district, I would suggest putting your old districts in as a backup under like this either local or special districts on the state system. Because if, let's say, someone resigns from your RTM this year and you need to figure out who is eligible to fill that seat, you may want to have that reference available to you so you can say, okay, what district are they in for this current term? And preserving that information on Converse may be valuable to you. So it is a pain in the butt, but as a step that I would suggest for you is to print out a copy of each page of the street list. So go through the streets one by one and hit print. And so then you'll have a big stack of paper with all of your existing street numbers on it. And you can enter that back in under special to create that backup. But then you can also, when you're working in your office, I'm putting this information in. One of the real dangers that you have is of, how do I put this? If two people are working on it and one of you forgets, both of you forget to do a street because you think the other person is doing it, and that street doesn't get changed, it may be very hard to detect that that street was not done. But if you are working off of sheets of paper and you can say this pile has been done and this pile has not been done, it's much easier to sort of keep track of what still needs to be done. And also, if you're in an office where someone, where you have like, different people who have like different levels of experience with Converse and with computers, you could say the person who does this a lot and has a lot of experience with it could do all the split streets, which are difficult, and the newer registrar or whatever can do the one that is all the streets that are entirely within one district, which are very easy to do. And so printing them on paper allows you to do that much more easily. Now, on the state system, sorry, I have to sort of move this panel so I can read what's on my own slide here. Hold on. So I've already talked about printing it out, but this is the area where you would go to do that printout. So you'll go to maintain town data, maintain street districts, and then pull down from the street list each street one after another and print that screen to a printer. That does give you that sort of paper reference of what your old districts were. And if you need to go back to that, it's something that you can refer to, which is helpful. All right, now when you are putting in your streets, I won't dwell on this for too long, but just know that the whatever street guide reference you have, whether it comes from me or if you're using what you get from the Secretary of State later on in the year, one of the things that happens is that the Census Bureau information is not really the same geographically as what your like town engineering department may have. It always runs down streets unless it doesn't. So sometimes it runs down a waterway, or it connects a cul-de-sac, or there's another line that they've just created to sort of create an administrative division of some kind. And the thing that you want to really double check before you put the numbers into the computer is any place in the town where the boundary between two of your state rep districts or two of your state senate districts does not follow along streets. Because any place where it deviates from the street boundary, where the even side of the street is on one side and the odd side of the street is on the other, is going to be something you need to like look up and check against like your like town assessor records or something like the map that's on file with your assessor or your town clerk. So that is just one thing I want to sort of caution people about, is don't use this information raw without double checking it. You do want to look up any place where the streets aren't being used on the map. So I'm gonna not read all of this because Fred wants me to get to the Converse stuff. But when you go into the Converse redistricting module, I want to tell you a couple of things. First, system runs overnight on Monday through Thursday. Once you finish and you hit complete at the end of the process, you will not be able to change voters, add voters, or do anything on Converse until the next morning. And if you were to finish on Friday night, you wouldn't be allowed to change any voters until Tuesday, because that's the way the computer system is set up. So just be mindful of that you're not going to sort of sabotage your own work in the office. Now, try to have everything you're going to put in on the computer ready before you start. And particularly if there's any streets that you're missing, streets that are relatively new to town, that you want to put in put into the proper districts, you want to do that before you enter redistricting, because once you enter redistricting, you will not be able to change your street list in any way. Now, one thing I think that a lot of people don't know that's helpful is you can go in after the first two steps where you set up your polling places and you set up your voting districts, and you can just hit complete at that point before you change any of your streets to be in new districts. And then you can do your redistricting street by street after the fact, right? So when I showed you a couple of slides ago that you can edit the street list under maintain town data and maintain street districts, that is something you can do if you're worried that you won't be able to complete your redistricting all in one day, and that you may need a few days or a week to do it, and you don't want to shut down Converse for that length of time. You can do piece by piece under maintain town data without shutting down the rest of your access to Converse. So that may be something that you want to consider when you do this. So to go in to the state system, you click on redistricting and you're asked to put in a maintenance effective date. So you put the date in that you're working, today's date on there, and you hit start. These top three where it says maintain polling place, maintain voting districts, maintain street districts, those are not links you can click until you hit start on here. So hit start and then those will turn into to clickable links. So the first step that they expect you to do is to create all of your polling places. After you create your polling places, you assign districts to those polling places, and then you assign each street to a district. Now, the problem is that you may not have all of your polling places decided by the time that you put this information into the computer and have to sort of do your new splits. So, if you're using your old districts, you can like continue to use them. If you're going to be adding a new polling place, you can include it there. One thing that you can do is you can create something, create like a placeholder to say, this is, the polling place is going to be determined. We're going to notify people when the time comes that of their new polling place. Because remember, you don't need to assign the polling places until 31 days before the election. So if you are stuck and you don't have the new polling places yet, you can go in, add to be determined or polling place not yet assigned, and assign districts to that until you know what polling place you're going to be using. So the second, when you add a new polling place, you see this sort of second picture down here has which districts are assigned to it from both for state federal election districts, for local districts, and for special districts if you're using them. The second window, so when you select assign voting districts, I'll talk about this a little bit. First off, if you have a Senate or an Assembly district that you have never had before, so for example, Wilton is a great example of this. They have district number 42, right? And they never had 42 because 42 used to be in Eastern Connecticut. You may find that Assembly district is not listed on this screen. And if that's the case, you may need to contact Steve Mason to make sure that that's put in there before you begin this process. Now, if you go in and find that a district you need is not there, you can either say, let's cancel it for now and call Steve Mason, or you can put, as long as you're creating the correct number of districts, you can put an Assembly district or Senate district in there that's not the right one. do all of your redistricting work, and then change it once Steve Mason is able to fix it for you. The risk is that you do not want to send voters notices telling them that they're in the wrong district in the interim, right? So you want to make sure that you really do stop doing, if you're putting in the wrong district number, that you pause all like voter notifications, whether it's additions or changes, until such a time that you have finished that. Now, you're asked to put in a voting district and a precinct for each district that you have. You can use a numbering system that you like. So I know that some towns use numerically, like from 1 to 10, and then have 0, 0 for the precinct for everything. Some towns, and so like what you see on the screen here is something that we copied from Trumbull that last decade, where we have our voting districts like that we use for our local council members and stuff. And then the precinct is a 2-digit number that refers to the state representative district. So when someone looks at it, they can see, well, this is what state rep district that they're in. And if you have a district that is split, and you can see on our screen, District 3 has 2 precincts, the 32nd and the 34th. You have to label them separately in some way so that when you generate your lists at election time, those, all the voters in the 132nd state rep district are on one list, and all of those in the 134th are on another. So make sure that for each row, the congressional district, the Senate district, and the assembly district are all correct for the people who vote in that district, because every voting district has to have all 3 things in common for every voter in it. Now, the one town, I don't know if Shelton is on this call, but I think the only town in Fairfield County that is being split by congressional district is going to be Shelton. And so for Shelton, you would want to wait until the state Supreme Court sort of finishes deciding what the districts are going to be before you do this. So once you are done creating the new rows and making sure that every district is assigned a polling place, including a placeholder polling place if you need to, you hit update. Now, at this point, if you would like to complete your redistricting and go home for the night and begin doing your street changes the next day, you can hit complete. And the next day, your new districts will be available to you. And you can change them on the system one at a time under that maintain town data section. Now, when you're ready to edit the streets, you pull up the streets one at a time from the top menu. And when you hit search, it brings up the plan that already exists. And you'll see 3 options for each: a state federal, a local, and a special. Now, state federal is required for every voter. Every voter must be assigned to a state federal district. Local and special don't have to have a voter assigned to everyone. So if you are not using them, you will find that if you save something as local or special, but you've accidentally left out a row, it'll save it just fine because it doesn't make you assign every voter. The idea, I think, is that for local and for special, that may refer to a fire district or a borough or one of these small like sub-municipal governments where some voters may be in that district and some may not have any district assigned to them. So that's okay. If you're using state federal to put in this information, if you miss any houses in the numbers that you put in, Converse will give you an error and say that you have missed some of the streets. Now, recently it has been giving you a less helpful error, which you can see down in the lower right, which says a CICS error has occurred, which means there's an error, but the system crashed and couldn't tell you what the error was. Just know that if you see that when you're entering your streets, it means that you have omitted a house by mistake, and you need to go and figure out basically what address number you have someone registered at that is not showing up in that range. Put in your numbers, evens, odds. If you have something like a street guide that has a lot of different segments, and for example, a street used to be split in a way that required a lot of rows of data, and now it isn't, you can go in and remove some of those rows and consolidate them. So if all the evens are in one district and all the odds are in another district, you'll only really need 2 rows to do it. And the lowest house number goes in the low range box, and the highest house number goes in the high range box. And when you hit submit, it will be finished. Now, I know a lot of towns, Norwalk is one I think that sort of started doing this, will try to omit like segments of the street where no residential properties exist. So if you have a big main street, but that only has a few residential properties on it, you may have a complicated list. And so on mine, you can see an example where only house number 132 is in voting district 4. So you can have a list that's like that only has a few addresses, but each address has its own number. I would say for the purposes of like complying with this redistricting that you do that work later instead of doing it kind of at this stage. But that is something that you can do if you need to. Now, if one thing I didn't show on here is that the sides can say even, odd, or all. If you have both sides of the street up until an intersection inside of, let's say, District 1, and from the next intersection, from that intersection to the end of to the town border is a different district, let's say District 2, you can put side all from 1 to 99 in District 1 and side all from 100 to 200 into District 2. And then you don't need to worry about the sort of the evens and the odds, but you need to make sure that you are doing that correctly. All right, so when you're all done, you can hit complete, or if you have been going under maintain town data, you can just sort of go back and print out this street guide. I would suggest that you double check your work to make sure that what you have entered matches the plan that you went into it with. So making a street guide, you can do it as a disk file if you want to make it in your own format and use it Excel. But it makes a nice, the system does make a nice like PDF format that you can use. So go under, I think it's Registrar Maintenance Reports, Street Districts Report, and select all of your districts, and put the polling place and the voter count on there so you can see if you have any segments where you expected to have voters that you didn't, and double check the polling place, and then compare that line by line with the plan that you were entering. And it doesn't matter how much experience you have with it, there will almost certainly be a couple of errors in there. Like I made, when I put ours in, we had probably 10 errors out of our 1,000 streets. And so checking that I think is an important step to make sure that you're not sending people to the wrong polling places. So that is time consuming. It'll probably take a couple of days, but I do think it's worth it before you commit to sort of, while it's still fresh in your memory and don't want to move on to the next thing.
Matt,
So that is it for the slides.
Could I interrupt to
you can't interrupt because I am in fact done. So there you go, Fred.
Okay, so my first question relates to that the unhelpful red error. So I can certainly see myself getting that error, and having, let's say, adjusted 60 streets, and having done the kind of stuff you're saying where we already have exclusions and things like that. Is there any solution in terms of contacting Steve Mason or anything to try and get a better response as to what the failure was?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible, and Steve can sort of help you with anything in the database. He's not really like the programmer of the system. So I think contacting Steve is basically because he is directly in touch with the producer of the software, that he's able to sort of more successfully directly lobby them than you or I might be. What I did for both for my town and other towns that I was helping was if I got a street and I really couldn't tell what house number was missing, I would print out a voter list from that street. And you can do that, they call it an alpha list, or the worksheet, I think, is another format in the state system that'll do this for you. And actually just cross off for each line every address that meets those criteria. So like you have a list of 100 addresses on a street, 100 voters on a street, and cross each one out when you see that, okay, this is even from number 182 to 598. cross off every house that meets that criteria, and you'll find some that are you'll find what's missing that way. It's time consuming, but hopefully you don't have that happen all that often. The other thing I would say is if you have a voter who's in an inactive or an off status, that was at an incorrect address, for example, an address that doesn't really exist, you may find that they are clogging up your ability to do an update because they can't assign that wrong address to a district. So you may have to go back and try and change that voter before you can put in the correct street listing. But once you're already in the redistricting module, you can't change the voter to a correct address, even if they were in there at a wrong address previously. So you either need at that point to cancel your redistricting, which I wouldn't do because that's very time consuming, or make an exception for that one address where you assign them to a district, and you make a note for yourself, reminding yourself to go back and fix that when you're done, because you don't want to have a wrong address sort of permanently enshrined in your street guide.
Thank you. So the other thing I wanted to mention was, for those who aren't familiar with some of the recent issues, some of our sister towns in other counties have run into problems where errors have been discovered many years after this redistricting situation. And I know for a fact that there was some issue with Hamden, and it made the local press there. And I don't quite know what the Secretary of State did, but of course they certainly opined on it and beat the registrars up a little bit in the news. But I just will say, it is a once every 10-year process, but the ramifications of it are long-term. I mean, we recently found in we have, three houses across the street that are not in the right district, and this goes back 10 years, and I said to myself there, but for the grace of God, go I could have been Hamden in that situation, and we've just, kind of solved it internally. But definitely, do spend the time on this and the double check to make sure that it is right, because it can definitely come back to haunt you long term, unless of course you plan on retiring in the next couple of years, in which case all bets are off. But if you're hanging around, this will come back and be an issue, and it'll be an issue for your successors, right? Because somebody's going to take the fall here, and it's not going to be somebody in Hartford. It's going to be somebody at the local level. So I've had Lorene Frampton has texted me a couple of times. One time to say that she had an issue, and she did send Steve an email, and he fixed it. The other text she sent related to EMS, and certainly, Lorene, if you're here, I'd love for you to unmute. But you said that you contacted the Secretary of State, and in EMS, the districts can't be changed. So that's, of course, a different system, and I don't know if you were just trying to make the things complementary, right? At some point, obviously, you will need to do that. Are you? Can you?
I am here, Fred.
Okay.
I am here. And
can you give a little more color on that?
What?
Just if you just explain your text to me a little bit more for the group.
Sure. On Tuesday, I had to call Heather because our town clerk, we finished our redistricting. It's all cleaned up in the CVRS and everything. And Steve took our old districts out because we lost 2 reps and got a different rep now. And on Tuesday, we received an email from the town clerk telling us that she needed to do a report for the state, so we need to put it back. I obviously am not going to do that, but I called and I got Heather, and oh yeah, Heather knew about it, and they preferred the new numbers anyway. And the problem was the form that they have to send in the first week of February is in EMS. And all she had to do was print out the voter registration things, and she could have sent it because it's all right. And she said that's all she had to send, but that's okay. The problem, but what she told me was about the EMS is, I said, okay, so should I go in and change EMS? And she told me I can't. Because when they set up the EMS, things were put into it on a hard drive or something. It's not stuff that can be changed. So,
I can speak to that a
oh,
little
good,
bit.
Matt. Yes, because she
My town
wasn't,
clerk had the same problem. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat here, I guess. And ED 626 is the form. And hilariously, although they have all this thing about entering the number of voters per district, that was removed from the state statute in 2011, but they're still doing it for some reason. So go figure. I helped make my town clerk make up a paper version of it that they could send in. But Shirley advised me when I sort of raised this issue that our new district numbers are not in EMS, and that prevents our town clerk from making this report, is that at some point in the future, they will do a batch update of all the districts that are listed in EMS, in Converse, and move them over to EMS, but they don't have any information about when exactly that's going to happen. So presumably when everything is done, they'll do that.
Right.
It would have
Hopefully
to,
before the
certainly have to be
primary.
before the August primary, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, she told me if they just printed out the change detail with the numbers of the voters and it had the right, because it'll have the right districts on it because we were finished. She said if she just printed that out and then wrote the number of tabulators and signed it, that would have been good enough.
And the thing I suspect, but don't know, is that I suspect that once they remove all the old district numbers and put new ones in, that all the data associated with the old district numbers will become unreliable or inaccessible in some way. Just the problems that we've seen with this system over the years make me think that that might be a problem, but we'll see. You know, I could be pleasantly surprised.
She also told me that I could do it for her.
There you go.
Yeah. So.
Right, so,
But
thank you. So
that's
one
how I
other-
know, yeah, there's not, we can't change them, so.
Thank you. So one final plug I wanted to say is, so as a town that uses split districts, meaning that we never change our polling places, so we have 12 local districts, and then people come into those polling places for a state election, and they get 2 different ballot styles. So so there's more state districts. I would really consider, and I think Matt touched on this a little bit, that you try and include somehow in your descriptions of those something that's more useful than the way we've done it for decades, which is to have a District 6 and a 6A, because God forbid I can never remember without a cheat sheet whether the A is the 150th or the 151st. So I'm definitely moving this time around and changing the names to literally be 6-150 and 6-151. Because
That's what we did. We can only do 2 numbers.
I found it to be confusing, and I've had to live with it now for 14 years. So time to make the change. Any additional questions for Matt, who was very generous with his time, and I'm so glad we recorded this, and I will disseminate this so everyone has a good reminder.
Okay, Fred, this is Jean. I do have one suggestion for people who are getting that unspecified red error message. Trumbull just went through this when we moved from 4 districts to 7 before the last election. Don't try to be that specific in the low number and the high number of your range. If it's every single odd number on a street, just say 1 to 99999. And if it's every single even, it's 2. So 2, 99998. That way you won't miss houses on the either end of your street numbers.
So to follow up on that, Gene, I actually engaged in an email conversation with New Canaan related to something similar, because they had somebody working on it saying that they wanted to go street by street and add those particular ranges. And that's not how they had done it before. And I advocated something similar to what you're saying, which is if your street obviously crosses boundaries or something, and that's a necessity, by all means do that. But if your street is smack dab in the middle of a district, it can create more problems than it's worth. But, we do exactly what everyone is saying as far as if, we have streets that run, the Post Road runs through my town, right? And so, East Putnam Avenue, one half of it crosses 3 or 4 districts, depending if you're on the north side of it or the south side of it. And we also do what Stuart says, which is, or what we were talking about for Norwalk, which is, eliminate some of the commercial areas where you're not expected to have folks registering, which is helpful. But I wouldn't advise doing it for every little street. Other comments? This will conclude the meeting, so if there's no more comments, first of all, I do encourage them or comments.
Yeah, Fred?
Questions. Yeah.
Fred, this is Tim Biebel. I just want to let you know that in Bethel, what we did is a precursor to doing the redistricting. We researched the high and low, or I should say the high number for each street in CVRS. And then we also researched the high number in the tax assessor's field cards. And by doing that, we kind of identified what the maximum range is at the current time. And so we ended up using that as the limiting range for every street. And we feel much more comfortable about that, because now if someone tries to register to vote at a non-existent address, we're going to catch it. If someone builds a new house at beyond the range, it'll come up, and then we'll be able to research it and decide whether to add that to our range and maintain the streets. But I also wanted to mention that it took us about 3 weeks going through the problem of the redistricting not completing for us, and also not giving us any indication of what the problem is. So we had to kind of figure out what it is on our own. We did talk to Steve. He didn't know what the problem was. And it turned out that because Bethel, through redistricting, lost 2 Senate districts, in other words, Senate numbering districts, and then added 2 new districts, we then had to reassign all the streets. But we also discovered that at the end, we had to make sure that the 2 districts that we no longer had to be assigned somewhere, or the system wouldn't complete. And again, we just kind of figured it out by trying to think like a computer. So we created 2 more districts that are going to be phantom districts, and we assigned those other 2 Senate districts to them. And then the next day, magically, everything was complete. So, but we can, if anyone's having that kind of a problem, get in touch with us. We can kind of help you with what we learned anyway.
Tim, that's great, and congratulations to your town for, I'm sure, all the extra compensation they gave you for all that due diligence that you did. That is fabulous. Glad to know that Bethel, is so well funded for that, and also, of course, your, but thank you seriously for your due diligence in doing that. All right, if there's are there any further comments or questions? All right, so hearing none, I'll adjourn the meeting, and I will send out a link to this recording. And I thank everybody for attending and hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.